We are capturing the questions. So once we go through the presentation, we'll have a Q&A at the end. I'm sure you all had your cards. Is there anybody that wants to ask a question that didn't get a card at the door? Okay. We will field as many of those questions as we can before the tape shuts off at 7:30. Any outstanding questions we will put on our website. We're building an FAQ. It's a robust website, has more information in multitudes of areas for a much deeper dive of what's going to happen. The additional, so every year, and I know a lot of you have participated in these workshops, and we'll also put this up on the board, but we have the Enterprise Fund Community Forum tonight. We have the Economic and Fiscal Update Community Forum August 22nd. We have the Economic Vitality and Development, and they all feed into each other, obviously, because it's a comprehensive approach, which leads us to where we are, the state of where we are with the enterprise funds. September, we move into transportation, elections, and public safety. So again, every year we have increased the outreach and engagement from a perspective of it's not enough just to have it on the web. It's not enough just to have it at the council meetings. We understand from a staff perspective that although we enjoy the council meetings, you all generally start paying attention when there is something to this magnitude. So again, we appreciate you coming. We're hoping that you find the information valuable and constructive as we move forward. We have a whole host of our resident experts tonight. We have Ken Rutt, who's the Director of Public Works. We have our entire leadership team of Public Works in the back. We have Graham Clark, who's our Interim Finance Director. Katie Allen, who is our City and County Engineer. And Anna Bertanzetti, who's our co-lead with Community Development and the Interim City County Manager. With that, as we roll, so this has been a journey since 2001. There is a lot of communication and feedback. I'm a wanderer, so it's hard for me to stay at this mic. But as we've been working towards, we have a new, thank you, Curtis, this leadership team. There's a lot of information out there right now about who did what and why they didn't do it, and historical lack of action. It's very easy when you come to this place to be able to say, I don't have ownership, but the prior decisions, and if we would have pulled one lever, that would have been the magic bullet and we wouldn't be where we are now. This is a much more complex problem to solve and plan to have a sustainable future as we move forward. So I'm going to give you a very brief introduction. Curtis, do we start with the, first slide, please. So you all, I'm not going to go through this in detail because I do want to ensure that we have time at the end to do as many of those Q&A cards as we possibly can. For those that have been around Broomfield, you'll be able to relate to some of these dates. For those of you that are new to the community, it'll give you a good overview of the path that this community's been on, which is a rapid one. So you can see 61 to 97, going from a bedroom community to hosting not only a regional mall, but a best-in-class mall with Flatirons, building the DTC of the North with Interlochen, having the 36 interchange that connected Broomfield to Boulder. We went from 0 to Mach 5 in a short 15 years. On top of that, when you're building your tax base, there is a sense of, we've got the mall, check. We've got the 96th Street, check. We got the event center, check. We're having a tremendous amount of interest from a sales tax perspective coming to this little bedroom community. It's great. And it adds to the grassroots effort to become our own city and county. Because we're doing all of these things so well, we're world class, we're top of the class, we need to consolidate. So there's a grassroots effort. It is a statewide ballot initiative that turns into a constitutional amendment, and the whole state agrees that the city and county of Broomfield, since the city and county of Denver in 1903, should become its own entity. So now we're really riding high. So we leave Adams County, Boulder County, Adams County, Boulder, Jeffco, and Weld. Part of that means that now we have to supply county services. So we were a municipality before, and now we do county services. Jail, sheriff activities, human services, clerk and recorder, assessors, all of those typically politically elected positions are rolled into our constitutional amendment so that those are no longer elected positions because Broomfield decided they wanted to be nonpartisan. So along with that comes a dramatic increase in sales tax, and a dramatic increase in services and costs to provide those county level services. As you can see, the constitutional amendment. So again, in the mind's eye of Broomfield, we are checking every single box. What 34 square mile community decides that they're going to have a constitutional amendment and ask the entire state of Colorado to vote to become our own entity? Sure enough, next slide, please. We become our own entity. 2001 to 2020, you can see the growth. As we're moving through these, and this is where I want to be really conscientious because words matter. And we're fortunate to have the press. I think we're fortunate. They took some of the presentation and the materials to be able to say water rates increasing 50%. And the reason it's increasing 50% because nothing was done for years prior. Again, it's much more complicated than that. So as we look at the increase in population, there is a, next slide, please. We have a philosophical approach from prior councils and prior staff that are banking on additional development. So when your philosophical approach is based on you have a lot more room to grow, your patterns reflect that. So when you are thinking that tap fees and other accoutrements that come with the enterprise fund will always also continue to grow. You anticipate that it grows with your population. You anticipate that it grows so that you can have asset management along with the new infrastructure. At some point, there is a crossroads to where you have to be able to not be heavily reliant on new and start taking care of what it is that you have. When we talk about run to fail, Ken Rutt's going to talk about this in a moment. You have post-pandemic, this is a new leadership team. From 2019, end of 2019 to 2020, into 2021, we were trying to keep the lights on with COVID. Starting an earnest effort in 2021 to really understand not only the general fund, but the enterprise fund, understanding that it hadn't been a philosophical approach to have high value. We had the big items taken care of. But when you have something that is under the ground and people don't necessarily see it, And it isn't one of those, if it runs well, the priority and the emphasis isn't necessarily on taking care of what it is you have, because eventually you'll get to it. Well, the operative word is eventually. So we have the pandemic, we have inflation unlike anything we've seen before, we have water costs unlike anything we've seen before, coupled with a population explosion and the inability to make an immediate shift into let's bank on the new and shore up what it is that we have. We've tried to smooth over the last 2 years. It was ineffective. What you are seeing now is the culmination of those 5 elements. So again, there's no one lever that could have been pulled that would have prevented where we are. A comprehensive approach, a deeper dive based on data, the numbers, the cost, and the fundamental nature of enterprise, that you can't use general fund to fund enterprise. And you have to be able to ensure that your base is covering your costs. We have been borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and Paul doesn't have any additional resources for Peter to borrow. The base rate that we are recommending, again, this is not a platinum level. We are not going to shore up all things immediately. This really is a 5-year plan. It is a model that is going to be repeatable and tied to the budget as it always should be. It shouldn't be a question whether the enterprise funds are healthy based on the health of the other funds. It should be self-sustaining, and it should be continuously reviewed. I'm going to hand it over to Ken Rupp, and then we'll go to the finance piece.
Well, good evening. Thanks for being here tonight. Really do appreciate your involvement and your desire to be here, because that's important. It's important that from my viewpoint as a public servant, to this community of Broomfield, it's important that we do everything possible that we can do to meet the service needs and the demands of our community. So let me first start out with a little introduction of myself so that you understand a little bit more of where I'm coming from. I had led the Water Recovery Division, which consists of wastewater treatment, operations and maintenance, the beneficial reuse of our biosolids program, which includes our Well County farm, which, by the way, I grew up on the farm, so that kind of fits in naturally. It also includes the reuse irrigation, the industrial pretreatment program, our regulatory compliance, and the implementation of our stormwater permit, which was focusing on construction activities and illicit discharges. Did that for about 23 years, led that division. Over my time in wastewater, we had 2 major wastewater master plans developed, which are 20-year plans for the wastewater treatment facility and how our wastewater was going to meet the needs of our growing community. We implemented innovative treatment technologies. We were the first in the world to implement the integrated fixed film activated sludge, which is a big fancy name for really combining 2 different wastewater treatment technologies, which is a fixed film and a floating film technology. We were the first in the world to introduce that technology. In fact, the engineering modeling, the textbooks are all based on our experiences in how we developed innovative technology, which also saved our community millions of dollars during our first expansion. The other thing we did was we instituted UV disinfection. We were the 4th facility in Colorado to do so, which eliminated the need to use toxic chlorine gas as our community started to grow around the wastewater treatment facility. And we looked for ways to how to protect our community as they developed around the wastewater facility. For those who remember, the wastewater treatment facility was about 5 miles out of town back in the day. Obviously, it is now surrounded. Also was responsible for capital planning of the wastewater treatment facility, and the 3 major plant upgrades, was also the project manager for those. So under the leadership of City Manager Hoffman, I was then appointed to the current position of Public Works Director. And why is this important to know? Because during my interview, we talked about our vision for Public Works, where we were at, where we needed to be, and the vision for the next 5 years moving forward. Together with the support of Manager Hoffman, we have transitioned from relying on growth, which is not sustainable, because Broomfield is moving towards build-out rather than where we were 10 or 20 years ago. So solving the issues of the present, we were focusing on the communication, not only between Public Works, the City Manager's Office, and Finance, which was always well done, but we also were identifying what are some of the brutal facts that we were beginning to see as our community began to age. And that's a tough conversation sometimes. It has financial obligations. Just as critically and importantly, we're planning for the future. That also happens to include the need for a stormwater funding mechanism. As our community has continued to grow and stormwater facilities have continued to expand. So our journey starts with the process that must go through and must address what we call the 3 buckets for our water utilities. Those 3 buckets are regulatory mandates, our obligations to our community to provide safe and reliable water and wastewater treatment facility services, to ensure that when you turn on your tap, you have clean water. When you flush your toilet, it goes away and it doesn't back up in your basement. We take those commitments seriously. And that's where the infrastructure comes into place. So all of those pieces, and how do we get there? It starts with making sure we have the right leadership in place to achieve those things, who are willing to face some of those brutal facts and look and plan for the future. We have to have the right experience. I have over 36 years of experience in the utility industry. You have to have the right focus. Let me go back to the right experience. We have several members of our leadership team that have over 30 years of experience. So we understand our system. We understand how it was built. We understand when it was built, what's in the ground, what does it need. So that's important. We have to go through our obligations. What were we agreed upon when we developed? It's more than streets. It's more than sidewalks. It's all the underground stuff that nobody sees. The water lines, the sewer lines, the stormwater lines, the reuse lines. And then how do they intermingle with other infrastructure such as electricity, natural gas, internet, cable connections. So it starts with all that in the right focus. Next slide. Okay. So how do we do that? We have confidence in keeping our costs as low, which we did, over the years, staff working with council through the time, is the rates were low. We focused a lot on how to get new development and what are the impacts to bring the new development in. What's the new infrastructure and what is going to demand for future maintenance? And then as we did that, what was our staffing level able to maintain as we were working through that development? We did finance, public works, community development, manager's office throughout the years. I've been involved in 3 rate studies. One rate study in 2012 put forth recommendations of rate increases over the next 10 years. Good, bad, or indifferent. Some of those were adopted, some of them were not. And it was all based on what was happening at the time. What was the revenues coming in at the time? What was the development coming at the time? And then compounding all of that was the increasing regulations, the unfunded mandates, the unprecedented inflation that has occurred since 2020. So in fall of 2023, staff provided a comprehensive overview of the enterprise funds and the overview of the anticipated infrastructure projects and where we were at and why we're at a critical crossroads. Next slide. So it is really what I'm trying to do, and I hope I'm coming across clearly that I'm trying to communicate the vital nature of this proposed utility rate increase and why we cannot minimize or overstate the need to invest in our utility infrastructure. This is not a Broomfield issue alone. It's not a metropolitan Denver area issue alone. In fact, it's not even a Colorado issue alone. It is an issue nationwide. Nationwide, utility infrastructure has been underfunded, and I'll talk a little bit more and show you something here in a little bit. So the combination of explosive growth, well, I'll explain a little bit when we're talking about the run to failure maintenance and what does that actually mean. Season the amount of maintenance to the budget instead of, so we size the amount of our maintenance activities to the budget instead of right-sizing the budget to the needs of the infrastructure. And the aging of our utility infrastructure and the resources needed from staffing standpoint, from a budget standpoint, and not keeping pace resulted in some maintenance backlog. So staff during this time, since I've become director, working with Manager Hoffman in Attorney's Office and Finance, we reached out to AECOM, who is a national and international and trusted infrastructure consulting firm, to review our infrastructure assets and our business processes. AECOM, using their asset management software, confirmed and supported our staff's infrastructure planning and budget forecasting to sustainable manage our utility infrastructure into the future. Staff is planning to continue this relationship as we move into the next phase of our asset management process. Next slide. So what are we really, probably what y'all want to know is what are we really talking about? So this slide here is, as Manager Hoffman said earlier, what we're talking about is the water flat rate, not the usage rate. The usage rate does not change. And the reason that's important is that flat rate is what we need to cover our operational expenses, not what it takes to increase from our chemical usage or our electrical usage. That's under usage. So when you use a little more water, like during the summertime, that's what the usage fee covers. The base fee covers our basic operations of what it needs to run the facility 24/7, 365 days a year. So what we're looking at is a $19.97 increase in that flat water rate. So where does that come from? Our chemical costs, in some cases, have gone up 300%. Some of our chemical costs pre-COVID was around $465 a ton. It's now over $1,200 a ton. Chlorine costs have gone up 3 times. They were about 47 cents, 46 cents a gallon. Now we're $1.47, $1.64, somewhere in that area per gallon. So our costs have increased. So we're asking for $19.97 a month to cover those costs. The usage cost doesn't change. We did not change your usage costs. Question. By the way, before I forget, I was supposed to, if you have any questions ready to go, our communication director will walk down the middle of the aisle. If you can pass those questions over, she will pick them up so we can start getting them ready for our question and answer session. So sorry about that, Julie. I got started too fast. I was too excited. The sewer fee goes up $8.88. And really the sewer fee stuff, there is some chemical costs, mostly sewers, mostly biological process. So we're talking about $8.88 on the sewer side to cover some of those increased costs. Remember, your sewer cost is based on only the water that you use between November 1st through March 31st. It doesn't include any water that you use during the summer. So when that sewer fee bill is based, it's based on the minimum amount of water that you use during the year. And then the third piece is the stormwater service fee, $11 per month for residential. So it does total $39.85. We have not had a stormwater utility funding fee. And over since the year around 2000, our stormwater infrastructure is really when it has started, and we need to provide a funding resource to start maintaining that utility. Next slide. So not taking into account new regulations or unfunded mandates, if you look at it, and this article came out in the Colorado Sun News a couple of weeks ago, and they compared, if we just looked at for water utilities in the state of Colorado, and they compared about 6 utilities. If you look at the 1980, what our rate was for water in 1980, and you adjusted it just for the inflation, the Consumer Price Index inflation number, which we used at 3.2% on average, from 1980 to 2024, the blue line shows what those rates would have increased over time. The red line indicates what our actual rates were, or are. As you can see, somewhere around 2017, 2016, or no, 2006, I can't see sideways, 2006, our rates started flattening out a little bit, and we started trailing behind the inflationary rate. In 2021, 22, we had some modest, where we tried to soften the rate increase, and we did some modest increases. It still wasn't keeping up with the inflationary costs. And so the 2024 projection, you see the sharp upgrade. So if you just take what the inflationary rate was and where our rates were, we were 22% less. We were charging 22% less than what the inflationary impact had on our operations. So sizing the amount of maintenance to the budget instead of right-sizing the budget to meet the needs of the infrastructure is critical, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to meet that need. Next slide. Unless you're in the water business, you probably may or may not realize that really we're one community, we have one future, and we have one water. So what does that really mean? So from a water perspective, all of the water is really tied together, whether it's our water source, where we draw from the western slope, comes across through the mountains around Rocky Mountain National Park, comes through Estes Park Lake, comes down to Carter Lake, Horsetooth, Boyd Lake, and then it is pumped up to Broomfield and about, I think, 26 other communities. That part, just getting the water to us, is a cost. The other piece from there is that once we get it to our Broomfield, what we call Glasser Reservoir, which is at the water treatment facility, that is our what we call terminal storage facility that we use to run our peak demands during the day, because the size of the pipeline to that peak demand would be overly expensive. So we have a storage reservoir. So that interdependence then also includes, as we begin to treat that water at the water treatment facility, and people use that water through drinking, showering, washing dishes, clothes, toilets, that water's captured. So we have infrastructure from Carter Lake to Broomfield. We have infrastructure from the water treatment plant to your homes, every single home. And then after it goes through your home, then we have another set of infrastructure to take it to the wastewater treatment facility. The wastewater treatment facility, then we remove the impurities, and pretty much whatever a person has is what we receive. There's no way to stop it, it just comes to us. And so we have to ensure that the treatment facility is able to handle peak demands. Then the wastewater treatment plant either takes it, puts it into the reuse, for reuse irrigation for our parks, a couple of the golf courses, our business parks, and so forth. And then the rest of it gets discharged into Big Dry Creek. Big Dry Creek is now, as of a few years ago, has been classified as a drinking water source. So Big Dry Creek changed from an agricultural source, which had different limits, to a drinking water source, which is more restrictive. So it reduced the levels of pollutants that we could put into the creek, which requires more complex treatment technology. From there, so then once it gets in the Big Dry Creek, the stream has certain characteristics which it can handle about so much pollutants before it becomes, the use is not attainable. Where the other piece comes in is stormwater. Stormwater that runs down the gutters, runs through the inlets, comes through a different set of infrastructure of the collection line, goes directly to Big Dry Creek or Rock Creek on our west side. That's without treatment. So when there's leaves, when there's grass clippings, when there's runoff from your lawn when it's just been fertilized, all of that contributes nutrients to Big Dry Creek. That uses up the allowable pollutants that we can have in that stream, which then in turn puts more restrictions on the wastewater treatment plant, increasing costs for the wastewater treatment facility. And then for most people, they don't want to think about it, that water goes down to the South Platte, and somebody downstream pulls it out for their drinking water, treats it, and it goes around and around and around until it goes to the Gulf of Mexico outside of New Orleans. It's one water. It's impacted. Our activities impact that water, which impacts our costs. So what are some of the things we've done just in the past couple of years? What are some of the innovative things that we've done? We've talked about the wastewater treatment stuff that we've done. Recently, we just completed what's called a carbon supplement. In order to remove nutrients and phosphorus in the wastewater, you have to have enough energy for the microorganisms to do that. Because Colorado along the Front Range is on what we call headwaters, it's fresh, clean water, it does not have a significant amount of carbon in the water, alkalinity and carbon, to support that microbiology activity. So then we have to add a carbon source to remove those nutrients, increasing the cost of wastewater treatment in order to meet the permit limits in our discharge. Other things that we've done, water treatment plant, we added a sonic algae control in the storage reservoir this spring to enhance our treatability and to minimize, for those who remember, last year was a pretty rough year on taste and odor concerns, particularly in August and September through October, because algae in the water, whether it comes from Carter Lake or out of Glasser Reservoir, produces, once you remove the algae, there's still a byproduct that can cause some taste and odor concern. The water is completely safe, but you may be able to taste it. Some people can, some people can't. Other things we've done, sewer mainline and manhole lining program. So what we do is we go in there and we reline it instead of dig and replacing it. So to reline it, it costs us $180 a linear foot. To dig and replace, it costs $800 per linear foot. And so we started instituting that technology and saving the community the difference. About $620 if my math is correct. It also extends the life of that infrastructure for at least another 15 years. We've improved pressure monitoring, and we're working towards automation of our pressure over the next 3 years, which is critical in our water distribution system. And why is pressure critical and the flow critical? Has anybody really sucked on a straw and that straw collapses when you're sucking too hard and it comes out? Same thing happens in a water line. When there's too much velocity and there's too much demand, at the same time that water line starts to feel that pressure, which results in water line breaks. And so that's why it's important to have the water infrastructure, such as the storage tanks that we're moving forward with in the north area. Other things we've been instituted is our GIS program, where we've now included our valve and hydrant field application, so the guys in the field can record their maintenance activities right there in the field instead of having to come all the way back to the shop and do that. So it enhances our staff's ability to address those maintenance issues. We've begun that this year. Currently, we're investigating satellite water leak detection and ground penetrating radar. How can we use those technologies to improve our ability and our effectiveness and efficiency in identifying water leaks? We're working on extending fiber to all of our sewer lift stations and water booster stations so that we can have additional automation and controls for those facilities. We're researching improved odor control from both the sewer lift station and wastewater treatment plant. As working at the wastewater treatment plant for many years, and those who live close to it know that from time to time, it's not it may have a slight odor. So really, what does this all come down to? What am I trying to really say is public works staff, our number one goal is always to provide you safe and reliable water, sewer, and stormwater services. As we mentioned, we are committed to continuous improvement and enhancing our ability to bring our community these vital and critical utilities now and into the future. Next slide. So regulatory mandates, what has happened? Since 2017, and yes, that is the correct number, since 2017, we've seen a 1,900% increase in the amount of monitoring parameters and frequencies that we must test at our water treatment facility and through our distribution system. 1,900%. Some of those things include lead and copper, which we're happy to note that Broomfield does not have any lead lines and have complied with that rule. And once our overall population, which was residential and working, had reached over 100,000 people, that's when we had seen out of that 1,900%, 50% of that increase was a result of the increased population. And then we also had additional water parameters for our corrosion control program of pH and alkalinity. And the federal and state regulations, we have been notified, and we do participate in all of the regulatory stakeholder meetings with the health department at the state level. We also monitor the federal through our lobby organizations, American Water Works Association and Water Environment Federation, as well as the National Association of Water and Wastewater. And we know that in 2027 right now, they are projecting that the public education reports from our annual publication will increase from once a year to twice a year, which will add an additional 160 hours of staff time to make that happen. Next slide. So on the wastewater side, we're looking at an increase of 669% since 2002. In 2002, we had 13 parameters that we were monitoring at various frequencies, and now that has increased to 100 parameters. In addition, we have seen a lower required detection limits, which requires more restrictive limits, which in turn require more sophisticated analytical equipment, which in turn costs us more. So the wastewater has increased 669%. So in the fall of 2023, staff presented the wastewater utility master plan that we worked with Carollo engineers on for the next 20 years and outlined what was needed to meet all of these new regulatory requirements, upgrade the facility from an asset management standpoint, and meet the need of growth. That estimate was about $525 million. It's in 5 phases, and it'll take 13 years to complete. Of that $525 million, the engineering estimate is $206 million just for the regulatory compliance piece. All of this, what does it mean? Increased complexity and cost for your wastewater treatment facility. Increased complexity and cost for our laboratory water quality analysis. Bottom, you'll see what the Colorado Department of Public Health Water Quality Control Division has published, which is their 10-year regulatory roadmap, which includes new parameters and increasingly more restrictive limits over our current permit. Next slide. So back when we got our stormwater discharge permit in 2003, staff working together presented options to council to fund the stormwater program. At which point, at that time, council chose to fund that through the sewer and general fund, and that's where we're getting it paid for right now. That's where all of the funding for the stormwater program comes, is out of a small amount out of the general fund for the street sweeping activities, and the rest out of the sewer fund. So over the years, we have looked at developing a stormwater management program and a funding mechanism, which is what we brought forth to council last week. So as mentioned earlier, staff is working on closing that loop of communication through our financial obligations, working through all the requirements of the growth with the various development agreements, and incorporating into our schedule the maintenance and best practices over the next 15 to 20 years. Over the past 20 years, our stormwater infrastructure has grown pretty much from 0 to 52 on water quality ponds and 116 basins. Some of those costs to maintain is just to remove cattails from a pond, not to dispose of them, but just to remove them and put them on the edge of the pond, is anywhere from $35,000 to $55,000 per pond, and then we would have to remove them and haul them to a landfill. So additional trucking costs. The one pond that we estimated last year to dredge was a $225,000 to dredge one pond, and we have 52 of them. Next slide. So what's driving some of these costs, obviously, is the inflationary cost. And if you look here at this slide, this is the construction index cost. And you can see that by the construction index cost, it has truly exceeded the consumer price index. It has grown since 2020 by 50%. So our projects have increased in cost by at least 50% over the last 4 years. And costs continue to remain high due to labor shortages as contractors are stretched to meet increased construction activities as a result of the many facility upgrades due to unfunded mandates throughout the industry. Next slide. Okay. Somehow I deleted that slide on my side. But in short, the City and County of Broomfield utility operations has a little bit over $3.428 billion of infrastructure. And it's growing. So we have to maintain that $3.428 billion of infrastructure. So, and like I said earlier, majority of this infrastructure is unseen, but is used in all of our systems to move, store, treat, distribute, and dispose of water. So our main four functions of utility is to supply clean water, to treat wastewater to protect public health from diseases, provide non-potable reuse water, and to ensure our stormwater is not polluting our receiving waters. Next slide. So why have costs changed so much? Well, if we look back and you take a look at what the federal funding was. In 1977, the federal funding accounted for 63% of infrastructure costs throughout our nation. The red line is the utility federal funding for water and wastewater. The lighter blue line is highways, the green line is aviation, and the darker blue line is all transportation infrastructure. So when you look at this slide, and you can see how since 1977, and this slide I think goes through 2014, but it continues the same today, is that for most part, all other infrastructure funding from our federal government has remained consistent within that range, except for water and sewer. Water and sewer infrastructure has dropped from 63% from federal funding down to less than 5% this year. So Broomfield isn't alone in the urgent need to renew our investment in our utility infrastructure. And unfortunately, the drop in federal funding has also put the burden of maintaining that infrastructure on the local communities. Next slide. So like I said earlier, when I got Ms. Manager Hoffman and I met and talked about what is our vision for public works, what is our vision for the utility infrastructure, we talked about a 5-year staffing plan. We talked about a 5-year infrastructure plan, and what is that going to take? So just in the first 2 years alone, we were able to provide 9 additional staff members to our utilities areas. And that was important because that shortage of staff over those years in the sewer and stormwater side, we had to prioritize working on the sewer collection system for cleaning and sewer lining programs. We were not able to do stormwater maintenance. Didn't have enough staff to cover that. Water side, the staff was dedicated to new construction and testing of the new infrastructure. and responding to emergency repairs, responding to regulatory changes. For example, the locate program increased our locates from 2,600 annually to over 26,000 we're receiving now. So we had to add staff for locates. And due to our street staffing level and the growth of the street system, our utility staff was also required to supplement our snow and ice operations, needing to help keep the streets and the snow plowed. So our utility staff were prioritized to focus on new construction, and which inhibited our staff's ability to maintain service levels for infrastructure maintenance. Once our staffing plan began to be implemented, staff has been able to work towards redirecting those resources to preventative maintenance. So our water line replacement program was funded previously at 0.48 miles annually. The water infrastructure asset management plan that we just went through with AECOM states that we need to do 3.33 miles annually, which is an increased cost of $4 to $6 million in annual investment. An additional 7 staff members by 2026 to reduce the backlog and realign our maintenance activities with the asset management program. Next slide. So an enterprise, what is it? How does it support it? How does it get its funding? Well, the enterprise cannot, by law, be supported by taxes. Doesn't matter if that tax is a sales tax or a property tax, cannot be supported by that. It can only be supported, and it needs to be self-funding through our base fees, which support fixed operations, which include staffing, electrical, preventative maintenance. User charges support our variable operating costs, which includes the consumption costs and the chemicals and electricity to maintain that. And then our license fees pay for capital expansion or growth. Next slide. So what are our risks? Water supply and pressure for fire protection needs to be maintained during peak demands. Continued deterioration of our existing infrastructure increases water outages, sewer overflows, and backups into homes and businesses, and potentially affects public health. Right staffing helps reduce these services and will provide our ability to meet our emergency response time. Otherwise, increased emergency response time will happen. So not increasing infrastructure investment greatly increases to a backlog of our maintenance activities. So this slide here, we talk about through the AECOM, when they evaluated our assets, they looked at, this is an example for the sewer side of things, infrastructure recommendation was $8 million a year, and if we just reduce that by $2 million and only invest $6 million a year in our sewer, the backlog of sewer infrastructure will grow from $23 million as of 2023 to $30 million in 2030 and to approximately $75 million in 2043. So with 3 to 5 years, 18% of our water distribution piping will be over 50 years old. These areas are affecting communities like First and Second Filing, Lacamora, Westlake, Maramani, Greenway Park, Northmore Estates, pretty much everything south of 136th. Restrictions not only will happen for residential development and redevelopment, but more importantly, it could happen with our future commercial tax base. So I take us back and say again that we have the right people. We have the right leadership and experience. And we have the right focus moving forward in how we want to address our infrastructure needs to ensure that you always have quality water, safe, delivered. with that, I'll turn it over to our interim finance director, Graham Clark.
As mentioned, I'm Graham Clark, the interim finance director. Thank you all for coming out. I don't have a bunch of slides, not near as much as Ken, so we will have time for questions. One question that comes up quite often is, where does Broomfield rank in terms of the communities in the Front Range? Broomfield has long had the least expensive water bills in the whole Front Range. You can see right here in the blue on the far left is Broomfield's existing. And the other blue bar is where Broomfield is anticipated to be. However, we know that there are a lot of communities going through the same process that we are right now. They're going to be raising rates as well. We've heard from most communities that will be the case. So by the time everybody raises their rates in 2025, our 2025 rate, which you can see on the right-hand side of that blue bar, we anticipate still being in the lower quadrant of all the Broomfield community, or all of the Front Range communities, excuse me. We anticipate being at least towards the bottom, and I think you will see in the coming months that a lot of other communities are going through the same thing that we are right now. Next slide. So as part of the annual budget process for the upcoming year, especially in April or May, we look at our utility rate model, and we do this as a finance staff. We also had a group that met every week of about 15 different folks, and they were from all different departments. And so it was a very collaborative effort. And we wanted to gather all types of information from different departments and get different insights from other departments as well as we made this decision and come up with a collaborative way of doing so. So based on the revenue and expenditures from 2023, and we've also updated the 2025 CIP with a lot of the regulatory measures that Ken mentioned before. We updated that, and we have anticipated rate increases for the next couple of years. This may change. There are many variables that go into these numbers, including precipitation, usage, additional regulations, and one of the biggest ones, as Ken mentioned, is inflation of project costs. Next slide. So development has slowed as interest rates have risen over the last few years. The capital balance, which you can see on the far left is where we are right now. The capital balance is in the middle line. You can see that's highly volatile and it's fully dependent on development. The operating balance, which is at the top, the revenue portion, that generally comes from billed revenue. And as Manager Hoffman mentioned, it doesn't cover all the expenses that we currently have. Water usage is also a largest component of the water bill. And that's also highly volatile, and it's based on precipitation. As it rains more, we water less, and therefore we have less revenue. Next slide. Similarly, revenue stability is needed to be adequate to keep up with the current bond ratings and have a healthy fund in order to issue more bonds in the future. We do intend on issuing bonds for the water tanks, as Ken mentioned, the 2026 expenditure, as well as the first phase of the wastewater treatment facility, which is also going to be in 2026. The revenues are needed to show the bonding folks that we have the revenue in order to issue those bonds and pay for those bonds going towards the future. The plan on the right shows where we intend to be after the rate increases, and the graph on the left is where we currently are. As we mentioned before, we are highly dependent on the capital balance and the usage charges, but we have to have a revenue stability that can cover these high volatility changes for our revenues. Next slide. So Ken mentioned the Stormwater Fund, which is proposed for 2025. And stormwater costs have always been part of the enterprise, but have generally been paid out of the sewer fund, as Ken mentioned. Broomfield is the only Front Range community that doesn't have a stormwater fee. All other Front Range communities have a stormwater fee. It's imperative for Broomfield to approve a stormwater fund for the future of the enterprise funds, for all of them. So we're not subsidizing and borrowing from one to pay for another. Each of these enterprises should be standing on their own with the fee that is implemented. Next slide. So similar to the graph that we saw before, this is where Broomfield is proposed for the stormwater component. This is just the stormwater broken out. You can see it's right in the middle. Again, we anticipate after a lot of communities raise their rates in 2025 that we will be towards the bottom once again. We anticipate that a single family will be $11, and condos, townhouses, mobile homes, and apartments will be a factor of that. Keep in mind, Broomfield has not had a stormwater fund, and all other communities have. Next slide. You can see this is the proposed rate increases one more time. The stormwater service is towards the bottom. And so of the $40 increase, a large component is the stormwater service fee of $11. As Ken had mentioned, we did try and smooth over the last couple of years, and it has been ineffective. So we don't see smoothing as an option. Next slide. We do know that this will affect some families more than others. And inevitably, the question comes up about those who cannot afford their bill. We intend on using a portion of the increase to each bill and putting in a program to help those that cannot afford their bills. We plan to do this in-house to help all those affected that cannot pay their bills. We really do want this to be, we're going to take a targeted approach to those folks and help them as we can. But as Ken mentioned, the ramifications of not doing this increase overall is very, very important. So we will be demonstrating those that do need financial hardship. We do intend on helping them, and we want that to be very clear. Next slide. And so the next steps, City Manager Hoffman mentioned these a little earlier, but these are some meetings coming up. We've got the economic and fiscal update on August 20th, along with a forum on the 22nd. On September 4th, City Council will be getting the 2024 and 2025 proposed budget. And on September 10th, that'll be available to the public. And then we'll have first and second readings in October on the 1st and the 22nd. And with that, that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. So Jennifer Hoffman introduced me, but for those of you who couldn't see me since I was sitting in the front, Anna Burton-Zetti. I'm one of the two co-directors for community development, and I'm currently serving as the interim deputy city and county manager. So I've got a stack of the questions. I don't think that we will make it through all of them, but we have a few more. Is that better? So Thank you. So as was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we will have a frequently asked questions section on the website. And the plan is to take all the questions and make sure that we have answers to the general questions. A lot of them were repeats, so you might not hear exactly your question asked. It might be because someone asked something very similar. But we'll put a frequently asked questions and answers on our website, and we'll continue to build that through the process. As Graham was mentioning, this is a process that will continue through October, so that website will remain live, and you can continue to submit questions, or you can provide comments via the website. So let's see. The first question, why is there no Public Utility Commission oversight? Ken, I wasn't sure if you could answer that. If you could.
We'll have to follow up with that question because that's really a legal statement question. Basically, how most municipalities operate their water and utility systems. If the city is running it, it is through the city government, the city and county government. There are a couple of districts. Obviously, South Adams County has a water district, and Denver Water is a separate district. But for the most part, the cities around us are all in the same operational structure as we are. But we'll follow up with additional details from our attorney's office.
Thank you. I think the next one might be for Graham. Can developers help front the costs put into a fund for infrastructure?
So we've tried that, and license fees is a component of our overall enterprise fund. But as you can see, the development we need to be able to pay for our enterprise and our base cost by those who use it, so it has to be equitable. And we've had developers pay for it a lot over the last 20 years, and it's something that we've tried, but the volatility of the development dollars is very volatile, can be up and down, and it's not stable. So it doesn't really help as much as we need.
All right, this is either Graham or Ken. What engineering firm was consulted in helping staff determine the 50% utility increase? There were a few questions on this regard, so outside consulting that was considered.
So we work with several different consulting firms. The one on the wastewater side, we worked with Carollo Engineers. They are also a national and international engineering firm that specializes in water and wastewater facilities. Carollo. Carrollo, I believe. Is Carollo Engineers. They have an office here in Broomfield, is their northern office. We've worked with Burns and McDonnell on our water side. They are also a national firm. They have offices throughout the Front Range. Their main office is in the DCT Center, and their home office is in Kansas City. The other firm is Arcadius, who ran our water modeling for our infrastructure, and they are one of the top water modelers in Colorado. Those are the main ones, and then of course we had AECOM, spelled AECOM. They were the asset management infrastructure. They reviewed our asset inventory and our infrastructure and help us develop those costs.
Thanks. Graham, why are base fees not high enough currently to support the current operations?
Well, that's been the case for the last 20 years, is that development has essentially covered for the base cost. And so we have development and we have our base cost, and we've been using development for many years to kind of cover the overages or the deficit within the base fee of operating revenues versus our operating expenses. So development has been covering that, and we're trying to right-size that currently through this latest rate increase. We're trying to right-size that so that we want to look forward towards the future. We don't want to continue to have development pay for that. We want to have a sustainable area in the future for all of our enterprise funds. And so that's why we're doing this right now. We really are right-sizing for the future as the community matures.
I'll take this one. Why are estimates for license fees so far off? And so really, the last few years, we could not have predicted what has happened over the last few years. I will say our staff in community development, as well as others from economic vitality and housing, as well as finance, look at projections out all the way to 2050 on a yearly basis. In fact, we actually update them about every quarter. But there are some things we can't predict, things like a global pandemic, these significant increases in inflation that all of us are experiencing, but have really impacted the future of development in Broomfield, at least the near future. Significant increases in interest rates also impact whether people move forward with new construction for homes and whether people are able to get financing for new development. So all of those things have significantly slowed development, and that's not to say that development is not occurring. If you drive around, you definitely see a lot of construction projects in Broomfield. So it's not that development is not occurring, it's just that it's not occurring at the rate that we had anticipated when we were doing the projections in the future. So that impacted our ability to predict the future of license fee as it was coming in the future when we do those projections. We continue to update them. A good source of information is a study session that we did for the City Council earlier this year in February. So we'll provide a link to that in the frequently asked questions. Let's see. Just answered that one. Graham, why can't you implement increases over several years?
So again, we've tried that, but something to keep in mind is that we do have some upcoming bonds, and so we've got some very major projects, as Ken mentioned, the $526 million for the wastewater and plenty of water projects as well. And so in order for us to bond properly, we need to show that we've got that revenue. And so that's why we intend to do this, to show that we've got the revenue for the future. And then obviously then we would get better interest rates and pay that over the next 20 years, a lot of those bigger projects.
Jennifer, this is why has there been a focus on blaming prior councils?
There is, as I said before, there is not one lever. This is not a council issue. This is not a prior staff issue. Councils can only make decisions based on data that staff brings. So if councils are not being asked, there's one thing. We're not going to do a deep dive on what councils in the past were better than others about passing or not passing. We need to stay focused on what it is that we've been doing over the last 4 years in order to right this ship. So it's not this staff does not plan on doing the blame game or finger pointing. I'm in monthly lunches with my predecessors, both of them, who were here for 35 years. We don't discuss business, nor do we discuss their philosophy about staffing, nor do we discuss what milestones should have, wouldn't have, or could have been reviewed. Those councils prior staff have made decisions based on current circumstances to the best of their ability. They didn't have the they didn't have the inflation, the pandemic, getting out of the hole with staffing. So again, from a leadership perspective, as leaders, we rely on the professionalism and voice from our staff. And when staff says, so this is just one of those where you don't want to get into the blame game. All I can speak of from my tenure, from August of 2019, it has been a continuous effort to understand public works and public safety and the staffing levels of both of those. From a fundamental perspective, not only from an enterprise fund, but from a general fund as well. We can't build out if we can't staff. We can't continue to ask our staff to do what we need them to do safely, consistently, with the ability to have the tools and regulations that they have in place. The pressure on our public works staff over the last 4 years has been undeniably brutal. As you all leave tonight, we have our public works crew in the back. Feel free to have communications with them about what was, what didn't, and how it should have occurred in the past. What we can focus on is how we plan for the future to get us into a sustainable future. We don't have time to be saying woulda, coulda, shoulda on past councils and or past leadership or staff.
Next one, Katie Allen, if you could take this one. Broomfield has paid for stormwater from the general fund historically. Why do we need to change this now, and what would a stormwater fee pay for?
Thanks, Anna. Katie Allen. I'm the other co-director of community development, and I think Graham covered this pretty well. So obviously Broomfield hasn't had a stormwater fee. We're the only local agency in the Front Range without one. So what we have been doing, so our stormwater infrastructure, it's our inlets, our storm sewers, culverts, open channels, stormwater detention basins. All that infrastructure is used to manage our stormwater runoff, flood control, and our water quality requirements. So certain stormwater operations, such as street sweeping, have been paid out of the general fund. And I know that example might be strange. So our stormwater quality permit requires that we do street sweeping. That keeps sediment out of the drainage ways and the receiving body waters. So some operations are being paid for out of the general fund. Capital projects and capital maintenance projects related to stormwater have been historically paid for either out of the sewer fund or the capital fund. And so the challenge with managing the stormwater infrastructure in that way is that multiple divisions are maintaining certain aspects and a different division is maintaining another aspect. And we don't have a comprehensive asset management plan, and that in reality our storm sewer infrastructure maintenance hasn't always been prioritized because of that. And so to create that stormwater fee and utility like all the other agencies, we can now form a more formal and proactive asset maintenance program. And rather than, the other alternative would be to increase the sewer fund and continue in the more piecemeal method. Either way, rate increases are required to meet those asset maintenance requirements and goals.
Graham? My property taxes were already raised. Why can't you use that money to pay for this?
Good question. As we mentioned, the enterprise fund legally has to be paid by fees. The fees means that you get a service, right? And so that's the fees are different from the taxes. And so we cannot intermingle between the general fund and the enterprise funds. That's illegal. And so, like we said before, Each of these funds needs to stand on their own based on the rate that we charge, and pay for all the operations and the capital associated with that. And so we're not able to do that. It's not legally allowable. But again, we do intend, much like the property tax, we do have a program to help folks with the property tax. We intend to have a similar program to help with the water bills if necessary.
Don't go too far. It's a similar question, but can we raise sales tax specifically for these improvements?
No, we can't. Very similar to the property tax, the general fund. Sales tax goes in the general fund. We're not able to do that either. So there are very strict legal rules on how things are funded in the state of Colorado. And it's something that every municipality deals with. So like I mentioned, a lot of the communities around us are doing the same thing right now, and they're dealing with the same questions. And they'll have similar answers because it's a legal question. So, thank you.
And that actually addressed a little bit of the next question, actually, which was, did Boulder or Louisville have to go through this? They both capped growth and approached build-out. But as Graham mentioned, we're not alone in this conversation. Many local jurisdictions are going to be having conversations if they haven't already started them this fall or in the near future. So this is also not specifically based just on growth. As been mentioned a few times this evening, this is also due to aging infrastructure, changes in the mandates regarding the regulations around water and wastewater. So there's a lot of different factors that play here. It's not specific just to growth.
I was just going to add, it's as we've looked at all of the other communities, how they have smoothed, if they have smoothed what has been their approach to collecting an inventory, what's their asset management program, how much are they spending on asset management? Did they determine that based on industry standards? Is there a certain percentage of the total? So we have $3.4 billion. Is there a percentage that we should be spending on those asset managements? And the answer is yes. That is one of the factors that goes into planning for what the future looks like. But when we look at all of these other communities, it depends on how old the communities are. And by that I mean the newer the communities are, the more expensive their water rights were to purchase. So Broomfield did a really solid base in multiple areas, but two in particular. One was securing water to build out. So the Chimney Hollow Reservoir, that was the latest bonding package that Broomfield had been working on for about 25 years, was secured in 2021. The question is, that infrastructure, in order to get the water that we have stored, almost like that last mile piece. So when you're talking about the age of the infrastructure, what was the methodology in those communities for asset management? Have they always consistently raised rates to accommodate for the growth, for the inflation, for the unfunded mandates, for the additional obligations? So each one of these communities has a different performa or profile, if you will. So when you're looking at we don't spend a tremendous amount of time figuring out where we are. It's really just a snapshot because everyone is just so vastly different with how well they've supported their systems and how much growth. So when you double in size as quick as Broomfield did over that period of time, it substantively makes a difference. So any one of those categories in and of themselves, it would be manageable. Thus, the rates increase over the last 2 years to see if we pulled one lever, if that was going to be significant enough to adjust and accommodate future CIPs. The answer was no. So it's the totality of the compounding nature of having that foundation, and then when you lay on the inflation and the unfunded mandates and the population on an already fragile system, we land up where we are now. And before we answer the next question, I pulled the Mayor Pro Tem in the back, and this is, I understand that many of you anticipated a much more robust interaction tonight. And our team wants to ensure that there are other opportunities before the public hearing, especially when we look at this slide and there's a significant gap between you all having this information and then not having the opportunity for the public hearing. So in communication, and we haven't checked in with the rest of council, which we'll do this evening, but recommending 2 more town halls that will allow an opportunity also to say, I'm pissed off and this sucks. Because it's very difficult not to be able to say that and then to learn about all of this information that we've provided. So we will team up and have 2 town halls, probably at the auditorium, so we can accommodate a larger group. And before you leave, we'll have the handouts with the website that has the comprehensive information. We'll do our very best to ensure that those questions, again, that we don't get to tonight will be on there. I'm assuming those will be part of the conversation when we introduce the additional conversation at the town hall. Certainly. Well, let me. I'm not gonna give you the answer because it's just the brainstorm. I'm assuming the recommendation would be a combination of both. Again, it's if you don't have the freedom to be able to be riled up, it's hard to get to the education piece, and we want to recommend that we honor and value that and find a good mix.
Next one is for Ken. I'll try to go through here and look for some unique ones, but this one is what happens if you don't get the fee increases now?
Great question. Difficult question. If we don't get the utility rate increases, the system will continue to age and continue to need additional maintenance. So we'll fall further behind. Right now, we're within like a year or 2 on the water side. And so they recommend if we increase that, we can catch that up fairly quickly and then be able to maintain that. The sewer side's going to take a little bit longer, partly because the sewer lines are deeper than water lines. Because when you put your infrastructure together, you don't want your sewer over the top of your water, just in case you have a leak. So you put your water above the sewer, so it's a little deeper, costs a little bit more money to maintain. Therefore, the costs for those facilities are a little more expensive. So if we don't get the rate increase, the infrastructure will continue to age and need maintenance. We will not be able to bond, which will delay the water tank project and delay the wastewater treatment facility project. The wastewater facility project is required under Colorado state law to meet certain milestones depending on capacity. So you're ranked, you're in your permit from the state, you have 2 different things you have to look at from a capacity standpoint. One is the organic material coming in. You're rated on a capacity of how many pounds you can treat, and the other is on the water coming in. So you're rated on how much water comes into the system. It is the organic side that we will hit first. Part of that is through water conservation, the organic side has increased over the years. Organic, it is the solid materials that flush down your toilet and the other parts that come down the toilet. That's what we're talking about. Sometimes there's food material in there also from garbage disposal. So basically that has increased, and basically from an engineering standpoint, 2016, 2017 area, that engineering rule of thumb was 0.16 pounds per person. We are now at 0.23 pounds per person. So that's an increase, a significant increase in the amount of organic material that we're seeing at the wastewater plant. And that's partly through water conservation. That's through low flow shower heads, and those type of things, which we need on the other side. So it is a blend of, you have to balance water conservation and wastewater treatment. So they do impact each other, going back to the one water, one community. So basically we will hit that organic limit, and at that point, if we're not under construction, by the time we hit 95% of that limit, then the state can come in and prohibit us from issuing any additional building permits.
So essentially, we have 3 years.
Yep.
We have 3 years to make.
We have to be under construction, within about 3 years.
We're going to do 2 more questions, and then we will turn around those town hall dates rapidly, so that we have plenty of opportunity to send the message out, get a facility that will host an appropriate number, and staff will work hard and jump in to get those questions turned around, documented, and up on that comprehensive website as quickly as we can.
This is either Graham or Ken. I think it's Graham. Why isn't the increase based on property values? People with million-dollar homes need to pay more than lower-income homes or older homes.
That's a good question. Not exactly sure how to answer that one, other than it costs us the same amount to bring the water to your door, whether you have a big house or a little house or an apartment. We have all these fixed costs, and we need to bring the water to your door, and you choose to turn on the tap or not. But it costs us the same to get that water to your door. So it's the most equitable to have the cost be the same for all of them. One thing I'll say is that the AWC is based on the usage. So Ken mentioned that earlier. What you use from November to March is based on your own usage. So that's the sewer charge. Average winter consumption is what that means. So it's basically what you use in the winter in your own usage in your house. We know what that is. We track that, and that's what we bill for the remainder of that year. So that's based on usage, and so that's obviously equitable on the sewer side.
Legally, money cannot be taken from the enterprise fund, but can general fund monies be spent on the enterprise infrastructure?
Seeing a theme here on a lot of those questions from the general fund and the enterprise fund, but once again, the answer is no on that. It's a very slippery slope once you start getting into moving money from the general fund into enterprise fund and vice versa. We want to keep it as clean as possible. The enterprise funds are the enterprise funds, and whatever we charge need to be enterprise related. So water, sewer, and stormwater.
And I'm going to add to it. One of the email questions, it just cattails on that. So if we for the stormwater, when we say we have a portion of that in general fund, and if we get a stormwater fee and a fund set up, and we take that money that we're spending in the general fund, clarify the amount of funds the drafter of that question was under the impression that if we get the stormwater fund, it's going to leave us a lot of money in the general fund. It's going to open up additional funds for us in the general fund because we're going to be shifting the street sweeping to the enterprise fund.
Yeah, the street sweeping, when you look at the totality of the enterprise funds, the street sweeping is a very small amount of the overall stormwater fund. So I think the stormwater fees are roughly $8 to $10 million, and the street sweeping is a very small portion of that. So it's not going to make a big impact. We don't pay very much out of the general fund, and it's mostly just for that street sweeping. And so, so there's not going to be a big windfall into the stormwater fund. In fact, most of it is in the sewer fund. A large majority is in the sewer fund, and so we will reduce the amount in the sewer fund, but that's why we didn't see a very large, relatively large increase in sewer, even though we have $526 million of upcoming expenditures. That increase went up about $9. It would have gone up more had we not implemented a stormwater fee.
We're grateful for you being here.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Julie Story. I'm the Director of Communications. We're putting that website, as multiple people have mentioned, it's broomfield.org/enterprise fund. You can go out there on your takeaway tonight. It's also that top QR code on the back side of that takeaway that you have. So if you go out there, you can, as we've mentioned, see the FAQ that will be up early next week with these questions on it, as well as any others that we get in. There's the form that's on that if you have other comments or questions that you weren't able to ask tonight, you can fill in that as well. We will also be putting a link to this meeting, as well as the presentation that was given tonight on that website, so you can go back and review that as well. Okay?
Yes.
Your slides, you couldn't even read them here. Are you going to have them the same size on your communication thing? Because they're not.
Based on the PDF that's on there, you should be able to expand or contract it on what you need when it's uploaded onto the site. Thank you.